Ora Premanande, Hari Hari Bol, all glories to assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to assembled devotees, Hare Krishna, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishaya Bhutale Shrimate Radha Govinda Goswami Namane Namane Brahmade Deve Gauravani Pachane Devi Shishrinivadi Kramya Chana Nishtarine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 30, Text 2. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tan tan dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam upadatte kvena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham te dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam artham upadatte dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan pumancho chatti yat krite. Yam yam, whatever. Artham, object. Upadatte, one acquires. Dukkhena, with difficulty. Sukha hetave, for happiness. Tam tam, that. Dhunoti, destroys. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Puman, the person. Shochati, laments. Yat krite, for which reason. Translation. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality, as the time factor, destroys, and for this reason the conditioned soul laments. Purport. The main function of the time factor, which is a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is to destroy everything. The materialists in material consciousness are engaged in producing so many things in the name of economic development. They think that by advancing and satisfying the material needs of man, they will be happy. But they forget that everything they have produced will be destroyed in due course of time. From history, we can see that there were many powerful empires on the surface of the globe that were constructed with great pain and great perseverance. But in due course of time, they have all been destroyed. Still, the foolish materialists cannot understand that they are simply wasting time in producing material necessities, which are destined to be vanquished in due course of time. This waste of energy is due to the ignorance of the mass of people who do not know that they are eternal, and that they have an eternal engagement also. They do not know that this span of life in a particular type of body is but a flash in the eternal journey. Not knowing this fact, they take the small flash of life to be everything, and they waste time in improving economic conditions. Once again, the translation. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality, as the time factor, destroys, and for this reason the conditioned soul laments. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam tam sajivam sadvaitam savadhutam parijana sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tvishe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we are continuing our discussion of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Today's text is a nice one. It's one of the very chastising ones, right? It's a heavy text, and these heavy texts are very important. Sometimes we'll feel as devotees of Krishna, or at least aspiring devotees of Krishna, that everything should be very, very sweet. We should always be hearing about Krishna's lovely pastimes, playing and running around and enchanting all of his devotees. And of course, we should always be engaged with that, right? But we should be engaged with that properly. And if we're not engaged with that properly, then we will also not be realizing such things as have been mentioned here. We can only experience and relish true happiness if we understand what false happiness is. I remember I was hearing from one devotee, one ISKCON devotee. He lives in Radhakund, and so because he lives in Radhakund, even though he's an ISKCON devotee, he's surrounded by all of the different Babajis and everything there, right? And he was saying that once there was one Babaji there, and he was giving initiation, and he was telling, right? He was telling his disciples, in the spiritual world, this is your form, right? Like that. he was telling. Anyway, so there were some devotees who had recently, some Western devotees who had found him online. They just came in and they said, tell us. And he didn't want to, right? And at one point he told them, and this ISKCON devotee was there in the room with him, right? And when they all left, he turned around to the ISKCON devotee and he told them they wanted their toys, now they have their toys. He said, and I just told them some random names, right? He said they want to play with something. They want their new form of sense gratification. Oh, I am so-and-so Manjri. I'm so-and-so Gopa. Wow, look at me, right? They want their new little form of meditation when they're chanting japa. Wow, this is my form, yeah. I am doing personal, intimate seva to Srimati Radharani, right? That's what they're thinking, right? So they said, they want their toys? Here, they can have their toys, right? So, if we don't have a proper understanding of our relationship to our senses, to our sense enjoyment, to happiness, we won't be able to experience true enjoyment, true happiness, true identity, right? We'll become, as we know, Prabhupada's two great enemies, right? The Mayavadis and the Sahajiyas, right? So then there'll be Sahajiya life. So even though sometimes people think, Srimad Bhagavatam, right? I know one of my friends, he's just going through Bhagavatam for the first time now, right? And, he would always hear in class, Srimad Bhagavatam says this pastime, that pastime. And he just got through the second canto. And he said, Prabhu, there's only like 6 texts of Krishna Leela, right? And so I was saying, actually all of this is Krishna Leela, right? If we understand all of this properly, then we will properly understand Krishna Leela. Without all of this chastisement, right, of material pleasure, we will just confuse the nature of Krishna's pastimes. And so we have this text here speaking about the great pain and labor for so-called happiness. I often think of, when I think of these texts, I'm reminded, of course, we know Srimad Bhagavatam. It has come down for what purpose? It's come down, for one of them is to cast away Kaitava dharma, right? This cheating dharma, right? And so when we hear Kaitava dharma, we often think, right? We think of, we think of the Sahajiyas, we think of these Mayavadis, we think, just recently I saw one Mayavadi. He dressed up with the clothes of like deity clothes, and then he stood in the pose of like a Narayan Murti, and they did full puja with all of the paraphernalia and everything of him. And I thought, this is definitely Kaitava dharma, right? This guy I wouldn't want to be one of his followers. I wouldn't want to end up, right, wherever he's going, right? It won't be a very nice place. Actually, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says, the Mayavadi, because they say Krishna is not real, Krishna says you are not real, and he lets them continue to be suffering in the material world for a very, very long time. Anyways, so we think of these things, right? But we know in Chaitanya Charitamrita, what does Chaitanya Charitamrita tell us the Kaitava dharma is? It tells us it's Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha, right? So even the things we normally take as stable goals of life, these things are rejected in the Krishna conscious conception. And thus, sometimes the chastisement, if you will, of the Bhagavatam is very difficult to digest, right? We're used to coming to Shastra and hearing that, your sinful activities, they must be stopped, right? But it's a little bit shocking sometimes to hear, economic development, right? All these things that we are so conditioned to think they are good, they are healthy, these are the things that will make a grand and great society. All of these things are nonsense as well, right? It's very hard to digest, right? People hear them, they think, maybe I'll find some way. Actually, I was hearing a discussion between these two Prabhupada disciples once, and one of them was saying, but Prabhupada said, right, in his objectives of ISKCON, right? That ISKCON should be doing this welfare activity in the world, right? See, it says in the world, so we should be doing all of these social projects and everything. And then the other devotee said, yes, but Prabhupada also said, maybe 1,000,000 times, right? Go back home, back to Godhead, right? Don't go back into this world, right? So, in this way, we'll sometimes see there's this tendency. Actually, there's one famous letter the one devotee wrote to Prabhupada saying, let's put a photo of a cow slaughter in Back to Godhead magazine to shock the people, right, into realizing how terrible cow slaughter is. And it is terrible, right? And Prabhupada, he replied, and he said, we shouldn't do this. There should be no photos of animal slaughter. And I was expecting him to say, let us keep the devotees' minds peaceful, something like that. But no, that's not what Prabhupada said. What Prabhupada said is he said, actually everyone in this world is a butcher, if they are vegetarian or not. Prabhupada said, we have no propaganda against the meat eaters or the non-meat eaters, right? We have propaganda against everyone. So we should not selectively attack these people. We should attack all of them, right? Because even if one is vegetarian, they are a butcher of their own soul. So in this way, Prabhupada is always staying transcendental, right? And so we can think, right? Who was more in the world than Prabhupada, right? But here we can also see completely beyond it, right? Completely unconcerned with its concerns. So in this way, we see Srimad Bhagavatam, right? It challenges us not only to let go of the obvious things, right? Pap and sin and all of these things, but it challenges us to let go of good deeds as well. And then, of course, beyond good deeds, it tells us to let go of piety altogether, right? This is the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's why sometimes Srimad Bhagavatam is categorized as a Sattvic Purana, right? It's a Purana in the mode of goodness. But actually it's a Shuddha Sattvic Purana, right? It's in the mode of transcendental goodness. And so, yes, again, we see stuff like this. Because often we'll read texts like this and we'll say, oh yeah, that's why, Hitler and Napoleon and all of their kingdoms ended, right? But this is also why Chanakya and all these other rulers, their kingdoms ended as well, right? All kingdoms are doomed to go away. We know very famously, right? Kakudmi, right? He was, we wouldn't say an impious ruler, right? And yet, when he comes back, it's all gone, right? He goes, visits Brahma for a few seconds, and then he comes back, and not only is everyone he knows dead, but anyone who'd ever remembered him is dead, right? Such is the nature of material reality. Actually, I was thinking about this when I was doing I was studying a few units we were doing on ancient Near Eastern history, so like Mesopotamia, that sort of area. And we were reading these texts about these kings, right? Famous kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus the Great, right? Very famous, right? Who knows about them, right? And none of us will know the first thing about them. I didn't know anything about them, right? But when you read these texts, they're these great glorifications. He has conquered even the sun, right? And people will talk about him. They'll say, a god has been born today, for Cyrus has conquered our nation, right? And here we are, only what, right? Maybe 1,000, 2,000 years later, and who even knows who this person is, right? Yeah, it's very funny, actually, when you read these glorifications, right? There's one, I still remember one, they talked about Antiochus Epiphanes IV, another great personality, right? Who we will all have no memory of, right? And there's a description, they say in the ancient Near East, they had an idea of like the demigods, right, in the sky. And they said he was so great that we know for sure he will even destroy all the demigods, right? So yeah, at the time people thought this very seriously. We laugh now, but at the time this was as serious as all of the rulers we hear today, right? Every time there's an election somewhere or a new ruler comes up, people say, oh, World War III, end of the world, right? This is the end of human civilization. Everyone's very serious like this, right? And we don't laugh when people say it now. But with, hindsight is 20/20. And we can see just how absurd these notions are when we hear that people have been thinking this way all along. Actually, these days we hear often, the world is ending, right? But I found it, again, very funny. When you read these old texts, they will say exactly the same thing. They'll say, this king has come into power, surely our generation will be the last to live. Right? 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, they're thinking this way, right? So like this is material consciousness, right? We think so much of this world. But what does Prabhupada say? This span of life in a particular type of body is but a flash in the eternal journey. Vishnujan Maharaj, he would say this. He would say, though we have so much longer to go, right? Our journey is very, very short now that we have come under the shelter of our spiritual master. And some devotees would say, oh, but it's a long while before I feel attachment to the holy name. And Vishnujan Maharaj, he would say, yes, it's a very short time in comparison to how long we've traveled, right, in this material world, birth after birth, right? So many births, and all of them are just a flash, right? But again, the materialist does not understand this, and so they are intoxicated, right, in their foolish understanding. And thus we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate, right? We hear this person foolishly is thinking, I am achieving all of these things, I am doing all of these things, right? This is my prerogative, right? And actually we see in that sense, the more that one identifies with the activities of the three modes of material nature, the less powerful one actually is, right? Because they've surrendered all of their power to the three modes, right? Because one isn't the doer, right, of all material activities, right? And so if one is not, the more and more we identify not with the activities of the soul, but the activities of the body, the less and less powerful one is, right? One simply becomes more and more embroiled in material activities. And so, we see this is the case, right? That eternality does not exist in this world, right? Everything is just a flash, and it is powerless, right? It is empty. I was hearing once Tripurari Swami, he was speaking, and he was talking about now, he's an old devotee, right? And he was, of course, we know, a great book distributor. Srila Prabhupada, he said, Tripurari Swami is the incarnation of book distribution, right? And so, Tripurari Swami, he was saying, so all of his godbrothers now, they've all grown old. Some have left Krishna consciousness for a while, Some are not so active, some are more active, right? Some have become great personalities like this. But he talks about, he remembers when he was young, in his 20s and his 30s, right? And all of them, they were serving together. He said in that moment he felt like he could see the swarup of everyone. And he doesn't mean the swarup in the sense of like an eternal form, but he meant this is who this personality truly is, right? So he says when he sees all of his, all of his friends, especially the ones who've gone a little wayward, right? He thinks, I saw who you truly were in those years, when all we did was serve Srila Prabhupada, when every single thought we had was in service to Srila Prabhupada. In that moment, he said he felt that he saw who we all truly were, right? And that we're servants of the spiritual master. And he said now he sees other things, and he said this is some temporary baggage now that has appeared, right? The three modes have again covered who this person is. But when he thinks of, his younger years, he thinks, then I have seen who all of my friends truly were, right? So I thought that was a particularly profound realization, and that's the eternality, right? Why? Because in that moment, when one is serving the spiritual master, in those moments one is no longer under the influence, right, of the three modes of material nature. One is no longer identifying with this material existence. And not identifying with the material existence, one is now truly free. This is the paradox of bhakti. By service I become free. By giving up my independence, I taste independence, right? Actually, it's said, I was hearing once, that when we do our sadhana bhakti, sometimes we are engaged in our sadhana, and we think, oh, I wish to progress, right? I wish to taste the holy name better. I wish to become a better devotee. I wish to become all of these things. I heard this once, that actually this is a very, very good understanding to have, but it is not the highest understanding. The highest understanding is that I engage in my sadhana bhakti so that my bhakti may be more effective in pleasing my spiritual master, right? I wish to become more attached to the holy name, so I'm more purified, so that when I do things, I am more effective in achieving the will and desire of my guru. I am only an anga, only a limb of my guru's desire. Whatever my guru desires, that is what my body exists for. And my sadhana, my devotional service is only there so that my body can more effectively, more efficiently, more wonderfully fulfill that desire. So So in this way we see Krishna consciousness, a complete abandonment of independence. But with that, we gain true independence. We know Mother Jashoda, right? Mother Jashoda, she's chasing after Krishna, right? Running after him. and Krishna, he's running. I really, really love this commentary. I think it's Sanatana Goswami now who gives this commentary. And he says, we hear in Damodarashtakam that Krishna, he is rubbing his eyes and tears are coming out, right? And so he says that initially, Krishna, he is rubbing his eyes so that tears come out, right? Because he'll think, when I cry, Mother Jashoda, her heart will melt, and then she won't punish me. I've done this before, right? So he's rubbing and rubbing and the tears are coming out. And then when he sees Mother Jashoda continues chasing him, then the tears come for real because now he's scared, right? And then he's rubbing so that he can see which way he's running in so he doesn't run into anything, right? So in this way, Krishna, he is running away from Mother Jashoda, right? And then Mother Jashoda, she captures him, right? And again, we know, I like to make this point again, it's from that same commentary by Sanatana Goswami, right? And what do we hear? Param Rishtam, right? We hear that Krishna, he is caught from behind, right? From behind he is caught. And I'm almost 100% sure it's Sanatana Goswami. He makes this point. He says that when somebody is caught from behind, that means they were running away until the last second. If you catch somebody from the front, that means at the end they said, okay, I give up. But that means Krishna, he didn't want to be caught until the final moment. This is the strength of Mother Jashoda's bhakti, right? Krishna did not want it all, right? And when Mother Jashoda begins to tie Krishna up, my spiritual master actually, he says that at that moment, we know famously, always 2 fingers short, right? My spiritual master says every single Shakti in existence, including the inconceivable potency, all of the Shaktis were resisting Mother Jashoda, right? Mother Jashoda, she is competing against all the potencies of that holder of all potency, right? In this way, all of these potencies are resisting this rope being tied together. And so in this way, Krishna, he is resisting, he's resisting, he's resisting. And then finally, we know Krishna, he sees the excitation on his mother's face, right? And then he feels bad, right? He feels compassionate. And then finally, she's able to tie the rope. And so my spiritual master, he makes the point. There we can see that the Kriya Shakti, right? The Kripa Shakti rather. The Kripa Shakti, the Shakti of mercy, is more powerful than all of the other Shaktis in existence. Kripa overcomes all of the other potency of the Lord. So in this way, Krishna, he's overcome with compassion, with love, with devotion, right, for his mother. And in this way, she's finally able to tie this rope. But where does she tie it? This is an interesting point. She ties it around the stomach, right? And so here, this is the reason why I brought up this pastime, right? Of course, we can see hints of this already, right? I mean, forget about hints of it. There we have Mother Jashoda. She's running after Krishna and she's capturing him. We hear in Ishopanishad, right? Krishna, he is so fast the demigods cannot capture him, right? No one can capture him. He's faster than all others running, right? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he makes the point that this means that our senses cannot capture him because our senses are demigods, right? And so if Krishna can outrun those demigods, then how can our senses capture him, right? So Krishna, he is beyond the speed of everyone. Even Brahma, we know, is bewildered, right, by Krishna. And yet here we have Mother Jashoda. Very simply, she captures him, right? Very easily, actually. So the point is, right, here we see already how powerful the devotee is. But anyways, so this rope, it is tied around Krishna's belly, right? And we hear all the material universes. Where do they come from? Each material universe, it is situated upon a lotus flower, right? And this lotus flower comes from where? Comes from the navel, right? From the navel of Vishnu. So this navel is having all of the material universes situated upon it. And so the point is made. All of those navels have expanded from the navel of that original, Govindam Adi Purusham, right? That original personality, Govinda. So all of these navels have expanded out there, right? So that original navel, right, which you can say is the source from which all of these other ones are situated upon, is found in that little Krishna. And what has Mother Jashoda done? She has conquered it. She has tied it up. So Sanatana Goswami Pad, he makes this point. He says, in this way, we see the devotee completely conquers all sense of material reality. With their love, with their devotion, not only have they conquered Krishna, but they've conquered all of material reality. And in this way, the devotee now is transcendent beyond it. The devotee is above this platform of material existence. So here we can see bhakti, right? In bhakti, one tastes actual power, right? There is actual significance to one's activities. So, this is the nature of bhakti, and it's inherently the nature of bhakti. We know what causes bhakti. The 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, I'm not forgetting the Sanskrit, bhaktya something. So, bhakti is caused by karma? No. Caused by jnana? No. It's caused by bhakti alone, right? So when one is engaged in bhakti, one is in the most stable platform. We can consider this is why at the end of Bhagavad Gita, what does Krishna say, right? Even before he says sarva dharman parityaja, he recaps the whole yoga ladder. He talks about having jnana realization, going from jnana realization, potentially entering into Vaikuntha. And then what does he say? He says the glories of his imperfect bhakta who is still attached to material existence, right? And why does he say that? Because that is a more stable position. And why is that a more stable position? Because only bhakti causes bhakti. So when only bhakti causes bhakti, this means that when one engages in bhakti, they are inherently not going to be caught in the three modes again. Because bhakti is beyond the three modes. Bhakti is not caused by the three modes. Does this make sense? You have no risk of drowning if you're running in the desert, right? They're completely unrelated, right? We can think the jiva's position is tatastha, right? We are the shoreline, right? And of course, we can think Maya's ocean, the sand, is the internal potency, right? Mahamaya and the internal potency, right? All of these other things are methods of mastering the external potency, and so you're in the water. But only bhakti is an incarnation of the Swarup Shakti, right? And so in that way, inherently one is stable when one is on the bhakti platform. Anyways, maybe that's too much philosophy for for this time of the morning. But so in this way, we can see that one is always fully stable when they are on the bhakti platform. Because bhakti will never allow one to be ensnared in material activity, in all of these things. Anyways, so we see this. And we see also, not only then is bhakti the most powerful, but it is also eternal. We know when Krishna, or rather we should say Vishnu, right? When he has the Mahapralaya, all of reality is unmanifest, and it all folds back into him, right? It all folds back, it reaches its unmanifest form. Then what happens? What is the first thing that happens when Vishnu starts to wake up? He starts to breathe, and what happens from his breathing? The universal creation. But what's the first thing that happens? What is the sound of Vishnu's breathing? It's the Vedas, right? So when Vishnu breathes, the Vedas come out, right? And so when these Vedas come out, what do? They sing very beautiful prayers, right? So this is the first thing that happens. We hear this in Srimad Bhagavatam, right? The analogy is made. In the same way when a king is woken up in the morning, how are kings woken up? They're woken up with their own glorification, right? Even we do this in the temple, right? Whenever we will sing, whenever darshan opens, in order to greet the king, we sing wonderful songs, giving the glories, right? And so kings do this often, right? This is the nature of kings, right? The kings are awoken, hearing their own glories. And so the Vedas, they do this when they come out of Vishnu's nose, so to speak, right? When that eternal sound is vibrated through his breathing. They are there, they appear, and they sing the glories of Vishnu. And what's interesting is the first thing they say is Jaya 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 Jam Ajita Dosha Gripita Gunam, right? They glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead as what? Ajam and Ajita, right? So we hear Ajita, Ajam, unborn, eternal. But what's interesting is these titles are given to Vishnu when? They are given to Vishnu before there is any material existence, right? This is the beginning of the manifestation. So if these titles are given to Vishnu before the material existence is manifested, this means there is eternality to these things. These names are not dependent on anything else, right? Sometimes we hear about the secondary names, and we hear that they have to do with Vishnu's relationship or Krishna's relationship to the material world. And that is true, but they do not depend on the material world. They come before it. Vishnu is Ajita, he is Ajam, before the material world exists, right? Before it is created. Of course, in one sense, we can say there is no before it is created because it is an eternal thing, right? But the point that's being made here is this glorification happens independent of any material existence. And thus we can understand the glories of the Supreme Lord, and thus the glories of his name, right, are eternal. They are not dependent on this material world. And thus there is eternality to Krishna's names. There is eternality to Vishnu's names. So, there we can see that. And now finally, I wanted to make a point on something interesting. Because what do we see in the word for word here? Tan tan dhunoti Bhagavan, right? We see here, we have Bhagavan is mentioned. And yet in the translation, what does Prabhupada say? The Supreme Personality as the time factor, right? This is based on Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, where he says the word Bhagavan can also refer to time. In the same way, very famously, Kalosmi Lokakshaya Krit, right? Krishna identifies with Kala. And what can Kala mean? Kala can mean death, but it can also mean time, right? So in the same way, we can see that words in Sanskrit have different resonances, right? In Vedic Sanskrit, there's a little less of this, because Vedic Sanskrit has a pitch accent. That's why when you hear yagyas being performed, like that, right? And that's done to preserve the pitch accent. A bit like Chinese. You hear Chinese spoken and the pitch changes. So Vedic Sanskrit is like that. So because of that, Vedic Sanskrit, the words are a little more separate. Because based on the pitch, it can have a different meaning, even if it's spelt the same way, right? But in classical Sanskrit, which Srimad Bhagavatam is written in, we don't have such a distinction. So there's a bit more fluidity in words. So Bhagavan, it can either mean Supreme Personality of Godhead, or it can mean time. And this is an interesting conception. And I think of this when I think of Bhagavad Gita, right? Because we hear in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, what do we hear? Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo viduhu sa kale neha mahata yogo nashta parantapa, right? So we're hearing here about the destruction, if you will, or rather the removal of parampara, right? And this is interesting, I think, because of course, the yogo nashta parantapa, the loss of yogic knowledge is not necessarily a good thing. But how does yogic knowledge disappear? If we think of that shloka, it's a famous shloka, which word is used to describe what is removing parampara? Time, right? Kale neha. Kalena, right? Through time, this yogic process is lost. So this is interesting, right? Because not only in Srimad Bhagavatam, but also in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, right? Again, Kalosmi lokakshaya krit pravriddhaha, right? I am time, time I am, right? So, this is interesting. Krishna, he identifies as time, and yet it is time that causes the parampara to go away, right? To be lost. This is an interesting point. Because often we will think of the influence of the time factor, right? Here we are hearing how it destroys material things, but here we're hearing something interesting. It also seems to negatively impact spiritual things. So it's a peculiar. But we can understand this as meaning that actually, whenever we see any development, even in Krishna consciousness, even if it seems negative, right? Krishna, he is using it for some purpose, right? Actually, when these things seem to erode away, they appear for a good reason, right? We can think our Gauriya Sampradaya was in a very, very bad position in the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, right? Actually, recently I found one book. I was looking through my library, and it was a book written at the time detailing the practices of the Gauriya Vaishnavas at a time. And I wouldn't be able to tell you what it said on the Vyasasana. I would get booted off for for mentioning how degraded the activities were. Completely. If you can imagine them as vile things possible, it was worse, right? I was really shocked. And anyways, but we can consider in such a bad time it was. But then we see Bhaktivinoda Thakur, right? The glories of Bhaktivinoda Thakur are that he restored the dignity of the Gauriya Vaishnava Sampradaya. So we can see there's some sort of complexity, right, to the nature of how paramparas move. In fact, almost we can say the glories of the Vaishnavas are established by what they're able to do in their context. So there's something to be said that Krishna both has a role in establishing, yada yada hi dharmasya. After that Mahabharata TV show, this is the shloka everyone knows, right? Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, right? We know that Krishna, he comes, why? To establish dharma, right? And thus he comes to establish parampara. But we're also hearing that he also is responsible for it to sort of rescind away. So once I asked a devotee, how do we reconcile these two things? And he said we should understand that the parampara, when we study the history of the parampara, we can see it is like the footprints of Krishna dancing with his devotees throughout history, right? Because the devotees are always doing different things, right? They have all these different glories. Actually, so once I asked another devotee this question, because Prabhupada, he would sometimes say we should really see that his godbrothers went back to Godhead and that they're pure devotees. And I said, how can we reconcile this with the fact that Prabhupada, he was not very happy, right, with his godbrothers, and his godbrothers were often not very happy with him, right? And he said, well, Prabhupada, he said we should not get too worried about his arguments with his godbrothers. Prabhupada says in one letter, as far as we are concerned, we just ignore it and keep on going, right? And so he said, the way he reconciles it is he thinks Prabhupada's glories are known so greatly because he was given no support, right? Because Prabhupada went on his own, there we got to see Prabhupada's glories in full splendor. Obviously, we would have anyway seen Prabhupada's glories, right? But many of us, we would have been blind, right? We would have been unable to notice it. We had to see something so miraculous, so amazing. And in that way, we're able to see, oh wow, Srila Prabhupada, right? What a great personality. And so he said, in this way, we can understand that in this context, right, we are able to see Prabhupada's glories, effulgent, wonderful. And so, coming back to the point, we can see the parampara is the dance of Krishna with his devotees throughout history. And sometimes spiritual knowledge will decrease, something will be hidden away, right? And it'll be hidden away, but then it can be reestablished, right? And in this way, there is the back and forth. Prabhupada himself said something similar to this, right? He said, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he could have made the whole world Krishna conscious, right? He could have preached in such a way that the whole world would have become devotees, but he did not. And why was that? Because he wanted to leave something for, well, Prabhupada said, so that I could do it, right? And then we can think, Srila Prabhupada then, he has the potency to make the whole world Krishna conscious. And why did he not? So that we would have some service, right? Otherwise, what service is left for us to do, right? And so in that way, we can see that there is room somehow. It's a little bit difficult to understand, right? Why the whole world doesn't become Krishna conscious at once. But there we can see it is the way that actually the Supreme Lord works to create space for preaching, to create space for such things. So this is a complexity, if you will. And so we can see here then Krishna in the form of time, right? In his form of the time representative. He is not only chastising and destroying the plans of the materialist. He is not only lambasting them. He is not only making sure that they don't that they don't succeed, that they understand the folly of their joys and their pleasures, right? He is also making sure that the devotees' pastimes are able to be enjoyed, right? He is also there facilitating the establishment of Krishna consciousness. Again, because Krishna consciousness is beyond time. It is timeless. But when it is being practiced here, we are at that verge between time and timelessness, right? We have a door, a foot in each door, right? Actually, we can become fully Krishna conscious in 1 second, right? But still we have some desire to think, maybe I want to, eat a chocolate bar or something, right? And even if we don't, still that desire there means that 1 foot is there, right? That's why actually, our acharyas, they speak of 2 types of shraddha, right? We know Shraddha is the first stage of bhakti. Actually, it's said the seed of Shraddha, the bhakti lata bij that enters into our heart, this is Shraddha, right? We get it through sadhu sangha, right? So from sadhu sangha, association with the Vaishnavas, we get the seed of bhakti, bhakti lata bij, right? And it is Shraddha. And in the seed of Shraddha, Krishna Prem is there. The flower of Krishna Prem is there, right? In the same way that in the seed of a flower, right? The flower is there, but it needs to be watered, needs to be cultivated and grown. But Shraddha is of two types. There is Lokik Shraddha and there is Paramarthik Shraddha, right? Lokik Shraddha is Shraddha of the world, right? Lokik, right? We can see it's not too complex. And Paramarthik is transcendental Shraddha. So Paramarthik Shraddha, this is the Shraddha that is referred to when we hear about the Bhakti Lata Bij. Lokik Shraddha is not such a thing, right? So what is this Lokik Shraddha? Lokik Shraddha, this is an otherworldly Shraddha. I mean, this is a worldly Shraddha, right? Unlike the Paramarthik. Lokik Shraddha is things like, well, this is my culture. It is my culture to engage in these things, right? So because I am being maybe somebody's a second generation devotee, right, in the West, and they're saying, my parents do this, so I do this as well. I'm very proud to be born in a devotee family. There's a Lokik Shraddha. In India, we can say, I come from a family of Krishna bhakts, so therefore I worship Krishna, right? I am doing all of this for these reasons, right? Or we can think, right, Lokik Shraddha is also, when we think, as Prabhupada is referring to in the purport here, right, of economic prosperity, of all of these things. People will say, this is the final step in my good life. I will have a nice job, I will have nice children, and I will be a respected devotee in the community, right? Thus done. There is the goal of life, right? This is also Lokik Shraddha. And our acharyas say this Shraddha does not produce bhakti. One can be on the platform of the Shraddha for millions of births and will make no progress in spiritual life because bhakti is not found there. Why? Because this Shraddha is Lokik. It's about our bodies, right? It's based on the bodily platform, right? Sometimes you'll hear people will say, we are Sanatanis, right? They'll say nowadays, right? We are Sanatanis. And ISKCON, what are these ISKCON people doing? They are not properly following all the rules of Varna, right? They are not properly following all of these Varna rules, right? They will say, you shouldn't have a proper distinction, Shudras, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, like this. All of these ISKCON people, they're just jumping and dancing and doing nonsense, right? Blah, blah, blah. The people will say like that, right? But it's interesting. They will say, I'm a Sanatani. And it's like, what is so Sanatan about your body, right? They're talking about, we should follow the designations of all of our bodies in material society. And it's like, well, then you are a great asanatani, right? You're basing your idea of faith based on the bodily platform. And so we can even extend this to devotional context. Oh, my parents do this, so I should do this because my body is a product of their bodies. Thus, I will worship Krishna. This will not produce bhakti. Paramarthik Shraddha. Well, actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, our acharyas, they define Shraddha, interestingly enough, not as saying that Krishna exists, although I'm sure they would affirm that Krishna exists, but they define Shraddha as saying that by this bhakti yoga process, I will achieve the goal that it is meant to give. This is interesting, right? I have full confidence and I have full comfort that this bhakti yoga process will give me the highest perfection. This is how our acharyas define faith. Faith is a confidence and a faith in the process of bhakti yoga. So if we have this Shraddha, even if we have it in a small amount, that I am a spirit soul, that I am Jiber Shorupoi Krishna Nityadas, right? That I am the eternal servitor of Krishna. If I have this faith, if I have this confidence, right? Then some paramarthik Shraddha is there. And then, whether it's 1 lifetime or 2 million lifetimes, Prem will at one point appear in the heart of such a devotee. So, this is why it's important to not only castigate the sinful enjoyment or the sense gratification, but also we should understand when does materialism enter into our spiritual life in the so-called name of spiritual life, right? When is there a lokik shraddha? When is there a lokik dharma, right? This is why we hear in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? Rai Ramananda, he is asked, what is the ultimate goal of life, right? And Rai Ramananda, what does he say? He says Varnashram, and of course, we expect Mahaprabhu will reject this. But the one part where everyone gets shocked is when Rai Ramananda says, Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja ham tvam sarva pape bhyo mokshay shami ma shuchaha. And what does Mahaprabhu say? Eho bahyo ageko ho ar. What? This is the final conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. Of all the shlokas Srila Prabhupada quoted, this is the one he quoted the most. If you go in Vedabase and you look up, it has the highest amount of frequency. Actually, it's the second most. The most is the Mahamantra. Actually, I found one devotee did a list of all of the shlokas Prabhupada has quoted, and it had the frequency count in Vedabase, right? And so Sarva Dharman Parityaja was up there with some huge amount of quotes. But number one was the Mahamantra, and the number was uncountable. So, so yeah, I wouldn't want to be that devotee who has to estimate, right, that amount, right? So, like this. We see, so Prabhupada has quoted this text so many times, and yet what is Mahaprabhu saying? This is external, speak deeper. One explanation I've heard is based on Jiva Goswami's Bhakti Sandarbha. In the Bhakti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, he makes a point that there are two types of surrender. There are two types of sharanagati. There's ordinary and there's extraordinary sharanagati. Ordinary sharanagati is the sharanagati we see with personalities like Bali Maharaj, right? Now we might say, that's not very ordinary, right? Bali Maharaj's sharanagati was great. The point with ordinary and extraordinary isn't that it isn't worshipable or that it isn't bhakti. He's distinguishing between two types of perfected bhakti, right? So one, the ordinary one, is when the sharanagati comes for an external reason, right? Or rather, we can say, when one does it because they realize they should, or because they realize it's the nature of reality. Extraordinary surrender comes when one realizes nothing, but it comes from the natural mood of the devotee. So the example that's given of an extraordinary sharanagati is like Rukmini, or one of the queens. They were surrendered to Krishna purely because of their love for Krishna. It's born from their mood. It's born from their personality, right? The ordinary sharanagati is born because of a situation or from a general realization. I can't own this material world, so I surrender it all to Krishna. Both are perfection, right? But they're two different types of perfection. One is born again from the sthai bhav, from the emotional heart of the devotee, and the other one is born from the gyan. Bhakti gyan, not jnana yoga, bhakti gyan, a realization of bhakti, but not the mood. So one is, you can say, a spontaneous one, and the other one is a realized one, right? Both are elevated. I don't want to say one is higher or one is lower, but I will say one is higher, right? And the point that Jiva Goswami makes is that while both are great, this extraordinary one is, as you can see from his naming of it, is the greater one. So when we hear Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, right? On its own, it can be read either way. And this is why Mahaprabhu, he says, speak more. Because we could take this text in two different ways. And depending on which way we go, it could be a higher one or it could be a lower understanding. Now then, why in Bhagavad Gita do we say it's the highest conclusion? Because what comes immediately before it? Manmana bhava madbhakto, right? Madhyaji mam namaskuru, right? So this, when we take them together, in fact, so this devotee told me, if Ramananda Rai said those two texts right with each other, then this would be the highest conclusion. Because what type of sarvadharman parityaja, right? What type of abandonment is it? It is an abandonment that arises from manmana bhava, right? From absorbing one's mind in Krishna. And when one's mind or heart is absorbed in Krishna, that surrender, which is born from that is the highest surrender. And that is the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. And so we hear, we see that then, right? In Bhagavad Gita, sometimes people will say, right? Well, if you ask somebody, what is the message of Bhagavad Gita? What was Krishna telling Arjuna to do? What will people say? People will say, fight, right? Fight in the battle, right? That is the message. If you go up to a random person on the street, Well, they will say, I already have Bhagavad Gita, no thank you. That's what they'll say, right? But we see the person will say, oh, he wants Arjuna to fight. But actually we know this isn't the case, right? We know, because what does Krishna say? Svabhava jena kaunteya, right? He says, anyways, born from your svabhava, Arjuna, you will fight anyways. People miss this. Krishna explicitly says it in chapter 18. He says, anyways, Arjuna, you will fight, right? But either you will fight according to Prakriti, or you will fight according to my order. That is the difference. Actually, Arjuna, he's a Kshatriya, right? When the battle starts happening, he will fight. He won't miss out, right? Right? That's the glory of the Kshatriya, right? He will anyways fight. The three modes will overwhelm him. Of course, he's a transcendental personality. We're speaking in terms of pastime, right? The three modes will overwhelm him, right? And then he will fight anyways. So this can't be the message of the Bhagavad Gita. It can't be to fight, because Krishna himself has said, anyways, Arjuna, you will fight. The message of the Bhagavad Gita is for Arjuna to fight in service to Krishna, right? And that's why the concluding instruction isn't fight. It's manmana bhava madbhakto sarva dharman parityaja. Actually, that is fully in line with the fighting, but the fighting is not the emphasis. Krishna's point is that Arjuna, either way, you will fight serving me in bhakti, or you will fight serving Prakriti in Maya. So this is the inherent message of the Bhagavad Gita. And that's why Krishna says at the end, right? Come to this devotional platform. Do this in devotion. Because you can act in the material world, but you can act in the material world in devotion to me or in devotion to Maya. There's no other way, right? So here we see again, Bhagavad Gita is making the same point as here, right? The material world, it destroys, its pleasures are fleeting, right? But while we are in the material world, we can experience an eternal world, right? We can experience eternality. We can experience Leela. That's why we speak of Prabhupada, Leelamrita, right? Leela in this world, right? Because then when we taste that bhakti is a way of existing in the world, apparently acting, right? But not acting at all, right? Action without action. So in this way, Krishna, he makes his point. And then Krishna comes to his highest conclusion, which is to become a devotee, to meditate upon him, and all of these things. So anyways, I've touched a few points, but really, I think if I were to summarize, it's just that the material world inherently is empty, and often we can sometimes confuse spiritual activities for material ones and material ones for spiritual ones, right? It's very easy for us to reject sinful activities, actually, right? Although maybe not as easy as it should be, right? But it's very easy. It's very easy to do all these things, but the Srimad Bhagavatam challenges us to do something greater, which is to reject non-sinful activity and pious activity as well. The Srimad Bhagavatam challenges us to act in a platform completely alien to the material world, but a platform that is eternal and infinite and fully powerful. Yes, Prabhu?
Sold by his household. So how do we understand the time factor in those instances?
I guess the point I was trying to get at is that we don't really understand the time factor, but we can just have faith, right? That somehow there is an arrangement going on, right? And that's why I was making the point. I think anyone at the time of Prabhupada's, like I use the example of Prabhupada, I think anyone at the time seeing how little support Prabhupada was getting and everything, I don't think anyone would think, everyone would be very frustrated. But we can see from here, because otherwise, originally Prabhupada wanted to go, not even to take disciples, he wanted to go as a representative of another guru. That was his original plan, from his humility, right? And then we wouldn't have seen, right, like the full manifest glory. Prabhupada, out of his, natural humility, would have not, would have continued going, right? So at the time, we wouldn't have seen any purpose to it. But what I'm saying is, if people are on the pure devotional platform, then somehow there is some arrangement going on, right? So I guess that's more my point. I can't give an answer to anything. I'm barely a human being, let alone the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? So, but all I'm saying is, yeah. So we see, yeah, all of these things are going on, but yeah, my point was that Bhagavad Gita, it shows that this time factor, it appears to work on spiritual things, but it only works to build them up. It only works to build them and facilitate them, unlike everything else which it destroys. So even if yeah, that was more my point. I don't think we really can understand. In hindsight, maybe, but yeah. Okay. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki. Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Radha Govinda Goswami Gauravani Pacharini Nirvisheshanyavadi Gramachanashtari. Hare Krishna.